Hi. You know, Metal Gear is a really weird series. I've talked about almost every game in the series on this channel before, but I've never talked about Metal Gear Rising. Look, I'll give you a fair warning, this one's gonna get probably a lot floatier than you were expecting a video on this game to get. But really, I can tell you everything you need to know about Metal Gear Rising with one simple phrase. Metal Gear Rising tells an absolutely beautiful story using scenes like this.
I think it's time for Jack to let her rip.
See, while I understand that Kojima's involvement in this game was massively overstated, this game sometimes feels like it's the most Metal Gear that a Metal Gear game has ever been. See, Metal Gear's always been about telling fantastic stories with nuanced characters and incredibly complicated themes that warrant decades of discussion, using absolute insanity, and at times raw stupidity to break the tension, and let you know that it's okay to have fun, even though you're in the midst of genuine high art. They're games about peace, war, individuality, evolution, growth, faith, action, espionage, comedy. It's a pretty wide net that this series casts. But while every other Metal Gear game looks something like this, and Metal Gear Rising looks like this, Rising still feels like it's doing nothing but taking all of those things above and turning them up to 1,000. However, this is all coming from the perspective of a massive Metal Gear fan. Seriously, I've got a 20,000 word script on the entire series that I'm just waiting for the motivation to turn into a video. While yes, someone who's casually familiar with the series might notice that the game is having fun with the tropes of the series, if you aren't a diehard fan in true Metal Gear fashion, this story is going to leave your head spinning and you might not understand what any of the characters are talking about half the time. While it's important to know about SOP and GOPS and George Sears and the Patriots and all that stuff, what I think is more important to understanding and fully appreciating this game is just understanding Ryden, our main character. We played as him in Metal Gear Solid 2, and he was a side character in MGS4, and I happen to think that he's the most interesting character that's ever been put into a game. Tequila Sunset, the Nameless One, Booker DeWitt, Sam Bridges, even Solid Snake himself. I don't think any of them can hold a candle to the amount of interesting things that we've seen happen to and around Ryden. So while this video is mainly about Metal Gear Rising, consider this to also be an analysis of that character that I love so much. So let's get started on Ryden. He was the focal point of Metal Gear Solid 2, but I've already done a 40-minute video on that game, so instead I'm going to do something tricky and try to summarize that video a bit. If anything I'm saying sounds outlandish, you've either just gotta roll with it or go watch my original video. Basically, throughout Metal Gear Solid 2, everyone is projecting expectations onto Ryden. The player wants him to be like Snake, his support team wants him to be like Snake, the bosses, the side characters, the Patriots, even Ryden himself just wants to be like Solid Snake. And over the course of the game, Ryden finally escapes these expectations and learns to be true to himself. While Solid Snake colors this entire game's interpretation of what an ideal person is, Ryden learns that he doesn't have to be that way. He can be his own version of ideal, and so he helps to destroy the very system that put all of these expectations on him and gave him that role to play, and he ultimately abandons any notion of being a Solid Snake stand-in. Basically, he learns that he should contribute his own ideas to the world instead of just being a sponge for other people's ideas. That's all absolutely beautiful, and the feelings and ideas that this game introduced me to have colored a surprisingly high percentage of what my life is today. But for our purposes in this video, that's basically all that needs to be said about MGS2. Oh, and Ryden was a child soldier nicknamed Jack the Ripper, and the final boss was his commander from those days. Ultimately, through their battle, the final boss, George Sears, aka Solid Snake, attempts to free him of the baggage of his past. So next up, we've got MGS4. Through a series of half-truths, Ryden has lost almost everything that he grew to care about in the time between MGS2 and this game. Mainly his wife, Rose, and his son. He blames this on his troubled childhood, calling himself a monster and a born killer and saying that that's what drove her away. So now, in spite of so much time trying to become his own man and escape his past, it turns out that that past is the only thing he has left to define himself with. So he submits to this role. He mutilates his body, turning himself into more of a robot than a man, and takes on intensive scout training, literally studying the blade, as it were. Rather than just living the life that he believes in, he's in a situation where all he can do is fight for what he believes in. The Patriots who ruined his life have now taken complete control over the world and the concept of war itself, and there's just no way that somebody like Ryden can live a normal life in a world like that. So he pushes his body well beyond its breaking point in order to help Snake finish the fight that he started back in MGS2. Ultimately, Ryden learns that moving on from your past doesn't mean that it stops being a part of him. He continues fighting for his beliefs, without discounting himself as nothing but a monster. It's a contradictory conclusion. The more he channels his troubled past, the more powerful he is as a fighter, fighting for his individuality. However, channeling that troubled past is exactly what the Patriots intended for him to do in the first place. He's like an undercover CIA agent, forced to do awful things in order to help dismantle the establishment that institutes those actions in the first place. He's playing directly into the Patriots' hands, only he's doing it to escape their control of his life. Like I said, a contradiction. However, the Patriots fall once and for all at the end of MGS4, leaving Ryden as nothing but a soldier without a cause. The concept of the war economy, this series' term for the military-industrial complex, had a clear face painted on it, the Patriots, but not anymore. Ryden went from fighting a definable enemy to just fighting the concept of war itself. This is where that contradiction he ended at in MGS4 stops being something that he can work with. He kills people, all in the name of a world where people aren't fighting all the time. He's got all of these ideas, his own ideas, about peace and justice, but they're ideas that he's testing against an enemy with no ideology, no culture, no shape. The concept of war and injustice itself. Ryden, at the start of Metal Gear Rising, is a man who's turned his troubled past into a weapon, effective only against an enemy which he's already destroyed. And now he's left with nothing but a dull blade, so to speak. A past that's eating at him once more, and a compromise with that past that's no longer useful in defending his ideologies.
My sword is a tool of justice.
This is what happens when you bring a tool to a sword fight.
Well, Ryden is destroyed at the beginning of Metal Gear Rising. Jetstream Sam pontificates on Ryden's weaknesses, saying that it's because he denies his weapon its purpose. A quote-unquote tool of justice isn't going to work against a group that has no ideology. Everyone here is just a cog in a machine that is the war economy. He isn't fighting people whose beliefs he opposes, he's fighting people who have no beliefs. Now, don't get me wrong, Ryden is still powerful as all hell, but if he wants to cut the head off of this particular serpent, a tool of justice isn't going to cut it. He needs a weapon designed for only one purpose: murder. So obviously all of this sword stuff is just a metaphor. The real weapon that Ryden is using against these guys in the beginning of the game is his ideology, his beliefs. And so in order to beat these guys, he needs to adapt those beliefs into something that's compatible against theirs. Wow, that got pretty floaty. See, this is what I was talking about earlier. If you aren't a Metal Gear superfan, you won't really be aware of just how much subtext is going into this story about a badass cyborg guy throwing robots through buildings. That right there is the essence of Metal Gear. Dumbass superhero characters being taken so seriously that they suddenly become some of the most intricate characters in their entire medium. Ryden is a character that's all about man's relationship with ideas, and Jetstream Sam is trying to introduce him to a new one. So, we go on a bit in the story, and we get to this pivotal moment. Ryden finds himself just mercilessly butchering cops in pursuit of his enemies. Well, just as he's nearing his destination, World Marshal Headquarters, Jetstream Sam comes in and reminds Ryden of just how hypocritical he's being. What, are all of these cops individually responsible for the institution of the war economy? No, at the end of the day, they're just victims of it, the same as everyone else. The absolute brutality of this game's combat really goes a long way to sell this idea. Ryden is completely merciless against people who are essentially just bystanders with no real stake in Ryden's mission beyond having signed a life-or-death contract. He's still calling a sword a tool of justice, but at this point, Jetstream Sam explains to him that this isn't what justice looks like. Ryden is a murderer, plain and simple. A murderer with good intentions maybe, but all he's doing is murdering everyone that doesn't line up with his ideals. Thus, we get to what I think is the most important scene in the game, and the most memed scene.
Doctor, turn off my pain inhibitors.
What? This is madness. You
Do it!
All right.
So Ryden is stabbed through the chest, and he asks one of the members of his support team to turn off the nanomachines that suppress pain in him, before pulling the sword directly through his torso. He's leaning into the reality of his situation, and doing something that he hasn't really done since the beginning of MGS2. He's living unashamed as Jack the Ripper, his old persona from his days as a child soldier where he was fed gunpowder and taught to love the feeling of murder. That's why he says this line.
I think it's time for Jack to let her rip.
Back in MGS4, and in the first half of this game, Ryden was living alongside his past as a child soldier and utilizing that pain to reinforce his ideologies. Now he's living within his past. He doesn't care about justice anymore, not really. He only cares about one thing now, his hatred for World Marshal and Desperado. Every enemy that Ryden goes up against from this point on, he's not doing it to try and ease the world into his views. He's letting himself be controlled by the psychopath within him, because, again, metaphorically speaking, ideas aren't going to work against an enemy with no ideology at all. Only stone-cold murder is going to do the trick, and luckily for Ryden, he's been suppressing the stone-cold murderer within him all this time. In a manner of speaking, he's been suppressing his true capacity for violence. So with that, Ryden sheds his doubts about the nobility of his cause, takes down World Marshal, defeats Jetstream Sam, learns that Sam too is living in the moment, having barely any cybernetics, and goes on to face Senator Armstrong. I like when things go quickly like that, a one-sentence summary of a couple chapters, but I'm going to have to hit the brakes again, because yes, even this fight, against the goofiest character in maybe any game ever, has loads of really important subtext going on. Because however little contribution Kojima actually had on this game, it's still a Metal Gear game at the end of the day. This is where we get to a particular elephant in the room that I was hoping to avoid.
Memes.
We don't need them around to filter and foster their memes any longer.
Now there's a pretty meme. Exquisite.
Memes. Okay, so basically, meme doesn't just mean a running internet joke. A meme is an old scientific idea dating back hundreds of years, I think, of an idea that humans spread in a way that resembles how we spread genes. Get it? Memes, genes. So using fire for warmth, for instance, would be a meme that is incredibly valuable. So, like a dominant gene, it's passed on from person to person, generation to generation. Democracy is a meme, communism is a meme, spoken language is a meme, smartphones are a meme, Ryden's ideologies are a meme, and in this case, nanomachines that harden in response to physical trauma are a meme. So, Ryden disables a majority of his nanomachines in this scene. Anyone who knows their MGS4 lore will know that psychological alterations, like pain suppression, are a huge part of what nanomachines do in this universe. Essentially, Ryden might as well have said something like,
Doctor, turn off my memes!
he's abandoning his ideologies in this scene. He doesn't need memes like individuality or nanomachines anymore. He just needs his raw moment-to-moment feelings. Armstrong, however, still relies on memes to fight. Unlike Desperado, these guys who were essentially just ideologically bankrupt mercenaries, Senator Armstrong actually does have an ideology that he's fighting for. Granted, it's a stupid one that sounds like something an 8-year-old would come up with while trying to sound tough, but it's an ideology regardless, and his use of nanomachines, again, a meme, runs parallel to that fact. So Armstrong's ideologies work against Ryden's sword, a self-proclaimed tool of justice, and his nanomachines allow him to snap the sword right in half. Like I said earlier, ideas work against ideas, but they aren't effective whatsoever against an enemy with no ideology. In a way, Armstrong destroying Ryden's sword using an idea, nanomachines, is a lot like Ryden destroying this Metal Gear Ray, using nothing but his idea, a sword of justice. The roles have been reversed. Armstrong beats the crap out of Ryden, until Blade Wolf shows up one last time to give us Jetstream Sam's sword. Sam had no ideologies. His sword was a weapon of cold-blooded murder, and as we saw in this scene in the beginning, cold-blooded murder will always beat out ideas. Ryden then uses Sam's sword to fight Armstrong once and for all. So Metal Gear is no stranger to things that don't make logical sense, but that tie up the metaphor that the game is weaving perfectly. Each game usually has at least one of these at its ending. Snake miraculously isn't killed by Foxdie at the end of MGS1. Ryden throws away dog tags with the player's name on them in MGS2, you get the idea. Metal Gear Rising also has one of these. So after being shown just how impervious to harm Armstrong is, being able to literally snap our sword with his bare hands, even as that sword is able to effectively glide through pure concrete, Jetstream Sam's sword just works against him for some reason. It's able to stab right through his chest. Well, this is where the game's metaphor really caps off.
I said my sword was a tool of justice. Not used in anger. Not used for vengeance. But now I'm not so sure. And besides, this isn't my sword.
A tool of justice wouldn't work against this guy. His memes are just stronger than Ryden's memes. A weapon meant for nothing but murder, though? That'll beat memes every time. At the end of the game, Armstrong does the typical supervillain thing. With his dying breath, he says something along the lines of, "We're not so different, you and I." The old Ryden would have been taken aback by this and worried that he was right. Jack the Ripper, though, he doesn't even pay attention to what this man is saying as he dies. He just pulls out his heart and crushes it, silently proving Armstrong wrong. Ryden used to be like Armstrong, fighting with an ideology, but now he's just a murderer. So this sounds like a pretty messed up ending. We just watched a man turn into a monster and that's it. But of course, it's Metal Gear, so there's more to it than that. See, Ryden does still have an ideology. He didn't kill these guys for literally no reason. He's just confident enough in that ideology that he doesn't even need to think about it anymore. He trusts himself to make decisions. So from now on, if he sees someone he doesn't like, he's going to kill them, confident that it's what the absent philosopher inside of him would have wanted. He doesn't need to think about it anymore, he just knows what he wants and makes it happen. Like I said, Ryden's story has always been one about memes. Ideas, concepts, deeper meanings, and man's relationship to those things. He was beaten down by ideas, he compromised with ideas, he channeled ideas, but now he's finally defeated ideas. He's done thinking. He's like an old man who is frustratingly immovable, not because he's ignorant, but because he's seen enough of the world that he already knows how he feels. In other words, Ryden is a completed person now. After years of not knowing who he was, or how he felt about how he felt, Ryden, for the first time ever, knows exactly what he wants, and he has the power to get it. I told you that was going to get pretty floaty. Hope you heeded my advice and came prepared. Metal Gear Rising is an absolutely goddamn insane game. After getting more familiar with its mechanics, it's become one of the most fun games I've ever played. It's intense, endlessly replayable, and it still gets me pumped every time I even look at it. But at the end of the day, it does something that I didn't expect. It treats the complicated, nuanced, and deeply tragic character of Ryden with the respect he deserves as a narrative tool. It sees past the badass sword-flipping cyborg ninja and displays in full view an evolution of a character whose arc seemed all but complete. It complements everything that was set up with Ryden in the previous games, and at the end of the day, it just understands all of those things I said above. Even without the series' staple gameplay, god-tier, ridiculously nuanced stealth mechanics, Metal Gear Rising understands what makes Metal Gear special, and it understands what makes Ryden the most interesting character to ever be put in a video game.
Just you and me, Jack.
Before I close out this week's video and get to work on my 300,000 subscriber special, I'd just like to give a verbal thanks to the patrons, especially those who are donating $10 or more monthly, such as Ava Avery, Almost Dead Again, Oskel, Atheist, Ben N, Big Time Jim, Calliope Iranis, Celadon, June Gina, Colin Gajic, Cornelius Nelson, Demise, Dennis Voshakamer, Dominic Johann, Eduardo Roca, Emma Plays Go, George Rosenbaum, Holly Schmidt, I Cashern, IJK, IW, Joannis, Jiggly Giggles, Joit, Jonah Shee, K, Kenneth Infinger, Kitty Cat, Knife, Kujata the Fish, Laffy, Lil Bunda, Lilith Vampas Hibiscus, Liv, Luz, M, Megan Walker, Mia Mako, Mixer Rules, Mocha Express, Mossfan1, Muppy, Neurofilter, Nicole, Of Lucian, Petra Zoo, Poof Donut, Queen Cthulhu, Raxvan, Robert Botang, Shiloh, Shano, Zoe, and Zyrobley. Have a great week, everybody.
There she is! Over there!